When 68-year-old construction mogul Richard Hawthorne walked into Mel's diner that Tuesday morning, he had no idea a 19-year-old waitress would teach him the most important lesson of his life. What she said when he offered her a six-figure job will restore your faith in humanity, and her reason for refusing it will leave you speechless. Richard had built his empire from nothing. Starting with a pickup truck and a toolbox 40 years ago, he'd turned Hawthorne Construction into a multi-million-dollar operation. But success came with a price. His son, Michael, now 23, had never worked a day in his life. The boy lived off trust funds, spent his days gaming, and showed no interest in the family business that Richard had sacrificed everything to build. That morning, Richard sat in his usual corner booth, watching this young waitress work. Her name tag read Sarah, and something about her reminded him of himself at that age, determined, focused, treating every customer like they mattered. He had no idea that in 5 minutes she would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, family, and what really matters in life. But first, you need to understand what brought him to this moment. This happened last September at Mel's Diner on Route 9 in Bakersfield, a place where truckers, construction workers, and retirees gather for coffee that's been brewing since 1952. Richard Hawthorne had been coming here every Tuesday for 3 years, ever since his wife Margaret passed away. The routine helped fill the loneliness that seemed to grow larger each month. Sarah Martinez had been working the morning shift for 8 months, saving every penny for college. She was studying business administration at the local community college, working 30 hours a week to pay for books and tuition. Her father had been injured on a construction site 2 years ago, and the family was still struggling to make ends meet. Richard had noticed her work ethic immediately. She never complained, never took shortcuts, and had a way of making every customer feel like family. She reminded him of the young man he used to be, hungry, determined, willing to outwork anyone to build something better. That's when Richard made a decision that would change everything. But he had no idea he was being watched by someone who would soon challenge his entire worldview. For weeks, Richard had been observing Sarah's routine. She arrived at 5:30 a.m. sharp, 30 minutes before her shift, to help set up. She studied textbooks during her breaks, highlighting passages about business management and finance. When difficult customers complained, she handled them with a grace that reminded Richard of his late wife. But what impressed him most was what happened during the lunch rush 3 weeks earlier. An elderly veteran named Frank had been counting change for his coffee, clearly short by $2. Without hesitation, Sarah had quietly covered the difference from her own tips. She did it so naturally, so discreetly that Richard almost missed it. That's when he knew she was different. You see, Richard had been struggling with his son Michael for years. The boy had dropped out of 3 colleges, crashed 2 cars, and showed no interest in anything beyond video games and parties. Despite every advantage money could buy, private schools, tutors, opportunities, Michael seemed determined to waste his potential. Richard's friends at the country club all had the same problem. Their children had become entitled, lazy, disconnected from the values that built their family's wealth. Richard had tried everything. He'd cut off Michael's allowance twice, only to relent when his son promised to change. He'd arranged internships at the company, but Michael either didn't show up or created problems that embarrassed the family. The boy had never learned the value of hard work, the satisfaction of earning something through effort and dedication. But here was Sarah, facing real struggles, working multiple jobs, putting herself through school, and she carried herself with more dignity and purpose than his son ever had. She understood something Michael had never learned, that work isn't just about money, it's about character, about contributing something meaningful to the world. Richard had built his construction empire through sweat and determination. He'd started with nothing but a high school diploma and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. Those early years had been brutal. 16-hour days, weekends spent building other people's dreams while saving every penny to build his own. But every calloused hand, every aching back, every missed family dinner had been worth it when he finally incorporated Hawthorne Construction. Now, at 68, he was worth more than he'd ever dreamed possible. But what good was wealth if his only child couldn't appreciate the sacrifice it took to build it? What legacy would he leave if Michael never understood the principles that created their success? That's when Richard decided to make Sarah an offer that would test everything he believed about opportunity, family, and what people truly deserve. He had no idea that her response would force him to confront the most difficult decision of his life. The morning of September 15th started like any other. Richard ordered his usual black coffee, wheat toast, 2 eggs over easy. Sarah brought his order with that same warm smile, asking about his weekend plans. But as she turned to leave, Richard called her back. "Sarah, could you sit down for a minute? I have a proposition for you." She glanced around the busy diner, then slid into the booth across from him. "Is everything okay, Mr. Hawthorne?" She glanced around the busy diner, then slid into the booth across from him. "Is everything okay, Mr. Hawthorne?" Richard had rehearsed this moment for days, but suddenly the words felt clumsy. "I've been watching you work," he began. "You remind me of myself at your age. You've got something most people lack: integrity, work ethic, respect for others." Sarah listened politely, unsure where this was heading. "I want to offer you a job," Richard continued. "Vice President of Operations at Hawthorne Construction. Starting salary, $120,000 a year, plus benefits, company car, and profit sharing. You'd learn the business from the ground up, but you'd have real authority, real responsibility." Sarah's eyes widened. That was more money than her entire family made in 2 years. But then everything changed when she asked the one question Richard never expected. "Mr. Hawthorne," Sarah said quietly, "what about your son?" The question hit Richard like a physical blow. In all his planning, he'd convinced himself this was about rewarding merit, about finding someone worthy of his legacy. But Sarah's simple question exposed the truth he'd been avoiding. He was ready to give a stranger what he'd never successfully given his own child. "My son," Richard's voice trailed off. "Michael isn't interested in the business. He's made that clear." Sarah studied his face with the wisdom of someone who'd grown up watching her parents struggle. "Have you asked him recently?" "Asked him what?" "If he wants to work. Really work. Not just show up to an office, but actually learn what his father built." Richard felt something shift in his chest. "Sarah, you don't understand. Michael has had every opportunity. He's never shown any interest in hard work, in earning anything. He's your son," Sarah interrupted gently. "And maybe he's never had to fight for anything because he's never had to prove himself to the person whose opinion matters most." The words hung between them like a challenge. Richard had spent months justifying why Sarah deserved this opportunity more than Michael. She was harder working, more grateful, more deserving. But deserving according to who? "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Hawthorne, more than you know. But I can't take a job that belongs to someone else." "It doesn't belong to him," Richard said, his voice rising slightly. "He's never earned it." "Neither have I. Not yet." Richard stared at her, realizing that this 19-year-old waitress understood something about family and legacy that he'd forgotten. She wasn't just refusing a job, she was holding up a mirror to his own failures as a father. "What if he doesn't want it?" Richard asked quietly. "Then that's between you and him, but he deserves the chance to choose. And maybe," Sarah hesitated, "maybe he needs to know that his father believes he's capable of more than video games and parties." Richard felt his carefully constructed worldview crumbling. For months, he'd been so focused on finding someone worthy of his legacy that he'd given up on the one person who actually inherited it. He'd been ready to replace his son rather than fight for him. "I have to get back to work," Sarah said, standing up. "But, Mr. Hawthorne, whatever happens with Michael, I hope you'll still let me buy you coffee sometime.
You've been like a grandfather to me these past months." As she walked away, Richard sat alone in the booth staring at his reflection in the coffee cup. Everything he thought he knew about success, family, and second chances had just been turned upside down by a teenage waitress who understood honor better than he did. That's when the real story begins. Richard drove home in silence, Sarah's words echoing in his mind. When he pulled into his driveway, he found Michael exactly where he expected. In the basement game room, controller in hand, energy drink cans scattered around his chair. "Michael, come upstairs. We need to talk." "Can it wait, Dad? I'm in the middle of a raid." "No, son. It can't wait." Michael sighed dramatically and paused his game. He trudged upstairs, already defensive. "If this is about the credit card bill, I can explain." "It's not about money," Richard interrupted. "Sit down."
They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, where Richard had shared breakfast with Margaret for 30 years. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "I went to the diner this morning. I offered Sarah Martinez a job, Vice President of Operations. 6 figures. Michael's face showed no emotion. "Okay." She turned it down. Now Michael looked surprised. "Why?" "Because she said it belonged to you." "Right, the construction company. Your precious legacy that I'm too lazy and stupid to understand." "You're not stupid, Michael. Could have fooled me. You've made it pretty clear that some waitress you barely know is more qualified than your own son." Richard felt the truth of those words cut deep. "I've made mistakes," he admitted. "I've been so focused on what you weren't doing that I forgot to see what you could do. Dad, I'm not you. I'm never going to be the guy who works 16-hour days and builds an empire. I'm just not built that way." "I know. And maybe that's exactly what the company needs." Michael looked up, confused. "You think differently than I do. You understand technology, social media, ways of connecting with people that I never learned. You see possibilities I'm blind to. Are you feeling okay? You hate technology." "I hate what I don't understand, but that doesn't mean it's not valuable." He leaned forward. "I've been waiting for you to become me instead of helping you become you." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you're interested, really interested, I want to teach you the business. Not my way, but our way. Together." "And if I fail?" "Then we'll fail together." "But Michael, you're my son. This company isn't my legacy to some stranger. It's my gift to you. Whether you want it or not is up to you." Michael stared at his hands. "I've been afraid," he admitted. "Afraid I'd disappoint you. Afraid I'd prove I'm as worthless as everyone thinks." "You're not worthless. You're young and you've never been challenged. That's my fault, not yours." "What would I have to do?" "Start at the bottom. Work alongside the crews. Learn what concrete feels like, what it means to build something with your hands. Earn the respect of the men who've been with me for 20 years. And prove to yourself that you're capable of more than you think." Michael was quiet for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, more steady, more mature. "When do I start?" "Monday morning, 6 a.m., site trailer on the Morrison project. Bring boots and gloves." "Dad?" "Yeah?" "What about Sarah?" "You should still help her somehow. She's working too hard for too little." "I've got some ideas about that." The next morning, Richard returned to Mel's diner. Sarah was refilling coffee cups when he motioned her over. "I have a proposition. Not a job. A partnership." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Hawthorne Construction is starting a scholarship program for hardworking students. I need someone to help design it, manage it, make sure it goes to people who truly deserve it. Part-time, flexible around your school schedule. And when you graduate, if you're still interested, we'll talk about that vice president position." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Hawthorne, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help me make sure other kids like you get the chances they deserve." "What about Michael?"
Michael starts Monday. Turns out he just needed his father to believe in him. That's when Richard understood what Sarah had really given him. Not just his son back, but the chance to be the father he should have been all along. 6 months later, Richard barely recognized his son. Michael had lost 15 pounds, gained muscle, and more importantly, gained the respect of the construction crews. He'd introduced digital project management systems that increased efficiency by 20%. He'd started an Instagram account that attracted younger clients. Most importantly, he'd found his purpose. The scholarship program had helped 12 students so far. Sarah had graduated with honors and accepted a full-time position as Director of Community Relations. She learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to discover their own worth. Richard learned something too. He'd spent years building wealth, but had nearly destroyed his most valuable asset, his relationship with his son. It took a 19-year-old waitress to remind him that legacy isn't about what you leave behind, it's about what you build together. The last time I checked, Hawthorne Construction was thriving under its new leadership structure. Michael had started a nonprofit division that provided free home repairs for veterans. Sarah had expanded the scholarship program statewide. And Richard, he was finally the father he'd always wanted to be. But here's the question that keeps me up at night. How many Michaels are out there waiting for their fathers to believe in them? How many Sarahs are working themselves to exhaustion because they've never been given a real chance? How many Richards are so focused on finding the right person that they've given up on the people who matter most? Sarah Martinez understood something that most people miss. True honor isn't about taking what you can get. It's about making sure the right people get what they deserve. She could have changed her life that morning, but instead, she chose to change 2 lives, and in doing so, changed her own life in ways she never imagined. The next time you're tempted to write someone off, whether it's your own child, a young person struggling to find their way, or even yourself, remember Sarah's words. He's your son, and maybe he's never had to fight for anything because he's never had to prove himself to the person whose opinion matters most. Sometimes the greatest act of kindness is helping someone discover their own potential. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to give up on the people who matter most. The question is, what would you have done? Speaking of unexpected heroes, wait until you hear what happened when a retired teacher found a mysterious letter in her deceased husband's workshop, and what she discovered changed everything she thought she knew about the man she'd been married to for 50 years.